During their time in school, many students of color achieve at significantly lower levels than do white students. Compared with white high school sophomores and seniors, Black, Latino, and American Indian students score lower on standardized tests of vocabulary, reading, writing, mathematics, and science. This achievement gap has been found even among black students who are members of relatively affluent middle SES families. These differences appear during the preschool years and continue to grow during the primary and elementary grades. Between first and third grade, the gap in math achievement has been estimated to grow by 10%, and the gap in reading by 40%. The gap continues to grow in subsequent grades, but at a slower rate. Over the past 15 years or so, progress in narrowing the achievement gap, as measured by the NAE progress test results, has been inconsistent. From 1992 until 2007, the gap between fourth grade white and black students' reading scores gradually narrowed, but has remained about 26 points since then. The same gap size and lack of progress in reducing the difference since 2007 exists among 8th graders as well. The gap in reading scores between white and Hispanic students was unchanged for 4th graders between 2002 and 2009, but it was slightly smaller in 2011. For math, the white-black gap narrowed between 90 and 2005 for 4th graders, but then no further progress was made through 2011. Among 8th graders, the white-black gap was largely unchanged between 1990 and 2011. The gap between white and Hispanic students was unchanged for both grades between 1990 and 2011. Obviously, much remains to be learned about why these gaps exist and what can be done to consistently work toward their elimination. The long-standing achievement gap between low SES and some middle SES students of color and their white classmates is perhaps the most researched and discussed effect of social class on learning. The exact reasons for the gap relate to a number of interweaving factors, including living conditions, family environment, characteristics of the student, and classroom environment. To cite just one example, kindergarten children whose parents had recently emigrated from Mexico or Central America had lower scores on tests of reading and math skills than did students whose parents recently emigrated from Cuba or South America. This example illustrates a couple of points we have made several times throughout the book. First, most problems have several contributing causes that interact with one another. Second, to assume that all members of a particular group are alike and can be taught in the same way is to engage in stereotyping. Keep in mind that not all Asian Americans are high achievers, and not all students of color have a negative attitude toward education and low levels of motivation. Health and living conditions. The U.S. Census Bureau began tracking poverty in 1959. The largest numbers in history were found in 2010. 50 million residents without health insurance and 46.2 million living in poverty. Many low SES children live in families that do not have health insurance. As a result, they are more likely to receive unsatisfactory health care and to suffer from such chronic diseases and conditions as asthma, diabetes, hearing defects, and visual defects. The link between poverty and health problems goes beyond simply the lack of access to preventative care. The stress that comes with living in poverty has negative impacts on both health and cognitive functioning. That seems ridiculous, that last statement. One way that increased poverty has influenced living conditions is that more students and their families are experiencing homelessness. When compared with others, students from homeless families have lower grades, lower achievement test scores, lower attendance rates, less engagement from their parents, increased school mobility, and social isolation. Okay. Homelessness is not just a big city phenomenon. It has spread in recent years to suburban and rural areas as well. Between 2008 and 9 and 2009 and 10 school years, there was a 57% increase in the proportion of people using programs for the homeless in suburban and rural areas. No matter where one lives, adverse living conditions, such as homelessness, are associated with lower aspirations for attending college. Family and community experiences. Considerable research has shown that the nature of childhood experiences affect a child's cognitive development and school achievement. And SES affects the kinds of experiences students have growing up. For example, low SES students are more likely than middle SES students to grow up in one-parent families. About 65% of black students live with one parent versus approximately 25% of white students, with the father usually being the missing parent. Like many other risk factors, such as experiencing homelessness, the effect of a one-parent family on the academic performance of a child is not straightforward. It depends on such factors as the duration and cause of the absent parent's separation, the age and sex of the child, and the type of interactions the child has with the remaining parent. But although one-parent families may not negatively affect the child's performance in school, two-parent families are likely to be more effective because each parent separately, as well as both parents in combination, have the potential to exert a positive influence. Some studies show that parent support for their children's schooling varies by social class and ethnic group. For example, white and Asian American adolescents are more likely than Latino or black adolescents to get support for academic achievement from parents as well as friends. Moreover, compared with the parents of low SES children, the parents of middle SES children in the United States expose their children to a wider variety of experiences. They tend to buy their children more books and educational toys and games and take them on more trips that expand their knowledge of the world, to read to them more and to talk to them more. Because low SES parents speak about 600 words per hour to their children, whereas middle and upper middle SES parents speak about 2,100 words per hour to their children. Many black and Latino children start school with a vocabulary of about 5,000 words, whereas the average white student has a vocabulary of about 20,000 words. These experiences accumulate and make school learning more familiar and easy than it would otherwise be. A child who has not had such experiences is likely to be at a disadvantage when placed in competitive academic situations. Furthermore, there has been increasing concern about the development of a technological underclass of children whose families cannot afford to provide access to computers and online services at home. In 2009, almost 80% of married couples with children had internet access at home, as compared with 58% of single-parent families. A similar gap exists for race ethnicity. The percentages of white, black, and Hispanic homes that have broadband internet access are 68%, 49%, and 48% respectively. That has to be evened out by now. The differences in family and community experiences are not just material advantages or more or fewer positive social experiences. Those differences include traumatic experiences as well. Some years ago, medical researchers began tracking what are called adverse childhood experiences. An ACE scale measured instances of physical and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, divorce, separation, and the incarceration, mental illness, and addiction of family members. The medical research has shown that those who have high ACE scores have significantly more health problems. It has also been shown, however, that high ACE scores predict difficulties in school. Among the most traumatic childhood experiences is physical violence. Among those living in urban neighborhoods, it is estimated that as many as 70% of adolescents witness or are victims of community violence. Even so, adolescents who have people in their families and neighborhoods who support them and who have opportunities for meaningful and productive participation in school and community activities are better able to overcome the effects of exposure to violence. Having social resources, what is called social capital, enhances one's resilience in the face of adverse, even traumatic childhood experiences. Overall, the interactions that children and youth experience in their families and in their communities constitute mediation, a concept we introduced earlier in the book in connection with Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. When mediation occurs, someone who is more intellectually advanced than the learner presents, explains, and interprets stimuli in a way that produces a more meaningful understanding than the learner could have obtained working alone. Students' motivation, beliefs, and attitudes. According to one major theory, motivation is governed by two factors: the extent to which an individual believes he or she is capable of achieving a particular goal, and the extent to which that same individual values that goal. While it is commonly believed that many low SES and minority students see themselves as less academically capable than middle SES students, researchers have found on average not much of a difference, but differences have been found for valuing achievement. Many low SES students of color place a lower value on success in school than their white middle SES peers because they don't believe that society will offer them the same opportunities later in life, and this belief may be sufficient to override whatever positive perception an individual has of his or her competence. Here are a few examples of the negative values and attitudes that are found among some ethnic minority students, especially males, and that inhibit strong academic performance. Here are a few examples of the negative values and attitudes that are found among some ethnic minority students, especially males, and that inhibit strong academic performance. Black and Latino adolescents are more likely than Asian American or white adolescents to believe that they can get a good job without first getting a good education. Asian American, white, and Latino adolescents who are doing well in school, on the other hand, see getting a good education as a prerequisite to getting a good job. Black and Hispanic girls in the 2nd, 4th, and 7th grades were much more likely to admire, respect, and want to be like high-achieving female classmates than average or low-achieving classmates. Although Black and Hispanic 2nd, 4th grade boys responded similarly, the 7th grade boys included many more low achievers on their list of admired and respected peers. Data from other studies indicate that although black males recognize the importance of working hard, many of them adopt an indifferent attitude toward high levels of school achievement. Personal experiences with racial discrimination, or even the suspicion that one has been discriminated against, have been linked to decreased perception of mastery, mistrust of teachers and school rules, and negative attitudes toward school. This decline in achievement-related values and attitudes on the part of minority male students, which is sometimes referred to as an aversion to acting white, has been corroborated by the observations of teachers who made such comments as, "They can do the work, but they just don't seem to care," and in the peer culture one risks rejection by exerting effort in school. In addition, research finds that black students with a B+ or higher grade point average and Latino students with a C+ or higher GPA were less popular with their peers than were black and Latino students with lower grades. This inability to establish what might be called an academic identity appears to be related to a sense that one is not part of the larger school community, that school does not meet one's needs, that one is incapable of meeting academic demands, and that schoolwork is not part of whom one wants to be. The frustration that is created by peers who do not share one's academic values was described by a black female student who was attending a student conference of the Minority Student Achievement Network. "I'm a member from Amherst, Massachusetts, and it is predominantly white. I'm able to get along with the white kids, but it's the black kids that I find I have a hard time relating to. In class, they're always thinking, there goes that girl, trying to be smart, trying to act white. It seems like I can't relate to them, and I am black myself. How is that supposed to make me feel? I'm trying to fit in both worlds, and it's like I have no place. The relationship of low esteem to low achievement is dramatic, but not always simple. In one study, many black high school and college students scored as high on measures of self-esteem as did whites, even though the black students had lower levels of achievement. This seeming paradox results from minority students' belief that because of discrimination, they will not have available to them the same opportunities for employment and career advancement that are available to white students. Being able to blame the environment rather than oneself allows one to maintain a healthy sense of self-esteem. This perception may also play a role in minorities' lower need for achievement, the characteristic we discussed at the beginning of this section. Classroom environment. Although teachers cannot work magical changes in a student's social class, health, family, or peer group, they can, as the following study illustrates, do a great deal to encourage learning among students of all social classes. For first grade children who were judged to be at risk for academic failure, either because their mothers had below average levels of education, or because they demonstrated such maladaptive classroom behaviors as aggression, defiance, lack of sustained attention, and poor ability to follow instructions, scored at about the same level on a standardized achievement test as their not-at-risk peers when they experienced high levels of emotional and instructional support from their teachers. By contrast, at-risk children whose teachers were judged to provide lower levels of emotional and instructional support scored significantly below their not-at-risk peers. Sadly, it is often the case that less capable teachers are assigned to schools that have the highest percentages of low-income and ethnic minority students. Other studies have found high levels of achievement among low SES students to be associated with the following attitudes and approaches among teachers: awareness of child's needs, moods, interests, and capabilities; classroom atmosphere characterized by pleasant conversations, spontaneous laughter, and exclamations of excitement; teachers' high but realistic expectations for their students; mastery goals, an approach discussed later in this chapter; never accepting low quality work; the use of scaffolded instruction; teaching thinking skills; aligning instruction with standards; using formative evaluation; eliminating ability grouping in the elementary and middle school grades, and tracking in the high school grades, and using heterogeneously developed classes supplemented by extra support class and after-school help. One New York high school that did this increased its graduation rate for black, Latino, and white students from 32% and 88% respectively to 82% and 97%. We discuss ability grouping and tracking more fully in Chapter 6, Accommodating Student Variability. A general suggestion for putting many of the previous suggestions into practice is to create a classroom environment and set of instructional processes that are similar to those found in such favorite extracurricular activities as athletics. Following the example of good athletic coaches, you should strive to make your classroom one where students respect and support one another, where students recognize that making mistakes is an inevitable part of learning, where each student's strengths are used to contribute to a larger group goal, where students receive constant feedback about their progress, and where students with more advanced knowledge and skills serve as models for and actively tutor classmates whose skills are not as well developed. Teachers' expectations for their students are so important that we devote the next section to this subject.